Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you are just joining us, we are broadcasting live to you from the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, currently approximately 5 miles off the entrance to Pearl Harbor, the island of Oahu in Hawaii. We are diving, joined by colleagues from around the country and indeed around the world, on the second of two Japanese Type A Kohauteki Midget, now known as mini submarines, that are associated with the attack on Pearl Harbor 75 years ago today. The team has just recovered the remotely operated vehicles, re-prepped them, and is now diving again, following a dive early this morning, 75 years to the minute from when that submarine was encountered, fired upon, and sunk by the vigilant crew of the destroyer USS Ward in the early morning hours. The Midget submarines, as they were known at the time, were two-man craft, 78 feet long, that were developed under strict secrecy by the Imperial Japanese Navy as part of a program to meet an enemy, and in this case with war planning, the United States, in the open seas. As big gunships fought it out, the idea was for these submarines, carried 12 at a time in seaplane tenders that had been specifically modified to serve as motherships for the Midgets, to launch them and then to have them swarm into battle at high speed, launching their 2 torpedoes into the sides of ships in the midst of a large, for the most part, all-gun fight. These craft had been developed starting with an initial foray into Midget submarine technology in the late 1920s. By the 1930s, following a series of tests, the Japanese settled upon a model that, with some modification, largely lengthening it to accommodate the stowage of 2 18-foot-long Type 97 torpedoes and a more streamlined hull form, with a conning tower allowing the crew to stand, to navigate, and to house a periscope. These craft were then to be readied for battle. The first group was laid down just as training began in 1940 for the beginnings of what was known as the Kohauteki Corps, or the Midget Submarine Corps, as is known in English. Under the guidance of Captain Kaku Harada of the seaplane tender Chiyoda, the initial mothership for the Midget submarines, the crews drilled even as preparations were underway to shift Japan's tactic from an open sea battle to an aerial assault on the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor, simultaneously happening elsewhere against other U.S. and Allied bases in the Pacific. That plan of attack, while largely confined to aircraft, was one that was argued against, particularly by those proponents of the Midget Submarine Corps who felt that they should play a role in the attack. Ultimately, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto decided that they would be allowed to proceed, but as stealth weapons, because it would be too dangerous to get Chiyoda into position and off the entrance to Pearl Harbor. 5, in some cases, recently completed I-class submarines, larger vessels, were fitted with cradles after their conning towers, and on these, 5 of the individual Midget submarines were deployed. They would be carried piggyback across the Pacific, and then on the morning of December 7th, a raid fanned out against the opening of Pearl Harbor's defensive zone and into the main harbor in East Lock. These submarines would then launch, not simultaneously, but staggered one after the other, making their way singly into Pearl Harbor. The 10 men selected for the task were recent graduates, for the most part, of the Japanese Naval Academy at Etajima. Each of them, for the most part, was young. The average age was just about 20. They were filled with patriotic fervor, the enthusiasm of youth, and the determination that their new yet untested weapon would be proven now in battle. It's interesting to note that as they prepared to leave, the only one of the crew to survive the ordeal of the Battle of Pearl Harbor, Kazuo Sakamaki, would later write that he and a friend walked down the street and, inspired by tales of samurai of old who perfumed themselves before going into battle, they each stopped in and purchased a bottle of cherry blossom flavored perfume.
I'm ready. Ground faults seem not great, but normal. Yep.
Sakamaki would survive because his submarine, the last to be launched from the I-boat I-24, was not able to penetrate the harbor, having more than 20 faults. As Sakamaki inspected the boat prior to launch, he and his crew member Kiyoshi Inagaki determined to go on anyway, even though their gyro compass was malfunctioning and there were other issues. Upon diving from I-24, they discovered that their submarine, I-24 To, or I-24's boat, was not trimmed properly and began to sink. As it was nearing crush depth at some 100 meters, 300 feet, Sakamaki and Inagaki crawled back and forth in the sub, physically manhandling lead pigs or ballast to get their sub back into trim. With that, they tried to steer forward, but with the compass out of order, they were not able to make the harbor entrance. Fearing loss of battery power, these subs were only controlled or propelled by batteries. And finally running aground and striking coral, which damaged the guards that protected the torpedoes, which had been capped over at the bow, but now wedged against metal framework that initially had been put there to protect those torpedoes. With them unable to fire, Sakamaki and Inagaki decided they would again try to determined that they would try to enter the harbor and charge out of the submarine and attack the enemy. But that was not to be. They drifted all night long, exhausted, worn out, burned by battery acid, overcome by fumes as water leaked in and splashed on their batteries, releasing chlorine acid. Exhausted from the ordeal, on the early morning hours of December 8th, they washed ashore. And there, Inagaki died, and Sakamaki was found the following morning racing up and down the beach. He was captured by Sergeant Daniel Akui, brought into a nearby hut for warming up and interrogation. And as one naval officer noted later in the interrogation, he noticed that Sakamaki smelled powerfully of perfume. A reminder of that just prior to departure foray with his good friend. That friend, Akira Hiru, is most likely the pilot who lies dead inside the submarine that we just visited a little better than 2 hours ago. One wonders, with that story, if somewhere inside that submarine there still rests that bottle of perfume that Hiru had purchased along with Kazuo Sakamaki before they left Japan. We are now preparing, as we drop to the bottom, to look at a second of these submarines, which for years has been the subject of some debate and a little bit of controversy as to exactly what role it played in the attack. Initially discovered by our colleagues from the University of Hawaii's Hawaii Undersea Research Laboratory, thanks to the exceptional work of Terry Kirby, Cullen Wallerman, Max Kramer, Steve Price, and Chris Kelly and others. This submarine was first found in its initial piece, because it's in 3 separate sections, in 1992. Subsequently, the central portion was found in the year 2000, and finally the bow was found in 2001. The 3-piece Midget has been identified by Japanese sources and by other researchers as most likely being the submarine launched from the I-boat I-16 or I-16 To, To being the Japanese word for boat. It has been the subject of debate as to whether or not this submarine penetrated Pearl Harbor. However, we will argue today, based on some new information, that this submarine did not make it into Pearl Harbor, despite provocative and interesting analysis of photographs, which some have interpreted as showing a Midget submarine, perhaps this one, close to the surface, firing its torpedoes into Battleship Row. Others have debated this point. Others have noted that the cruiser USS St. Louis, upon leaving the harbor just around 10 o'clock in the morning, reported that they had been fired on by a small baby sub, as they called it, which had fired 2 torpedoes and missed, the torpedoes having detonated on the bank. Having said that, others have noted and argued that perhaps they didn't see a submarine, but had fired at a piece of floating debris, a paravane, which was streamed alongside ships to sweep for mines. What is interesting is that this submarine that we're about to dive has fired its torpedoes. Whether they fired them inside the harbor or fired them against St. Louis will still be debated. But most recently, a letter was discovered, the contents of which were shared with us by a researcher, Pam Ribby of Agora, California, who's researching the Pearl Harbor story. The letter, written by Captain Roger Pineau, U.S. Naval Intelligence Officer, then working in the Navy History and Heritage Command, was written to representatives of the late Walter Lord, author of A Night to Remember, and subsequently that, the book Day of Infamy. Lord, having serialized his tale, was now getting ready to publish it as a book, and in checking on the various facts, asked about the fate of the 5 Japanese Midget submarines that had been deployed at Pearl Harbor. Pineau's answer was that, of course, one had been sunk by Ward, one had been captured ashore, another had been sunk inside the harbor by the USS Monaghan, the USS Curtis, and other ships having engaged it as it had surfaced at the height of the aerial attack. And with that, 2 seemingly were missing. But, however, around 1950, thereabouts, he said, an oceanographic expedition headed by George Vanderbilt III had discovered a submarine which had been blown into 2 pieces, lying a few feet apart, just outside Pearl Harbor at the Port Hand Buoy. For those of you who are sailors, you will recognize that as being the #1 buoy at the entrance to Pearl Harbor's channel that leads through the gap and into East Lock. It was at that location that USS St. Louis claimed on the morning of December 7th that a submarine had fired torpedoes at them.
Say again?
In doing research, we know that Vanderbilt's expedition had taken place in 1951. Having left Los Angeles, it had gone to Hawaii and tested out systems before going into the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and then further on into the Pacific. Vanderbilt was a former naval intelligence officer.
We call that.
Pineau's letter indicated that the report of the discovery was made confidentially to the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet.
We got bottom.
And with that, he ordered it destroyed.
Your starboard manip cam.
Interesting to note,
fog in there, and we got concerned, so we killed it.
The 3-piece submarine lies directly offshore from that location. In all fairness, one can draw a straight line from any one point to another, but interesting, straight out from where that is.
On Seirios, 100 meters.
This submarine, having been pulled up from the bottom with a cable looped around its tail, having its aft tail section cut free with a cutting torch, was then picked up, threaded with cable, taken out into deeper water and sunk.
You got any idea?
So we leave it to you out there as to whether or not this submarine ever made it into or
blowing in my face a bit, so
Pearl Harbor, and as some have theorized, then retreated to West Lock, where it was subsequently found, or if Pineau's letter being the case, if this boat, potentially I-16's Midget submarine, simply waited outside the harbor for the enemy to retreat and then to fire on them, as would be the case with USS St. Louis. Interesting to note, in 1960, another one of the subs, most likely that launched by I-18, was found on the other side of the entrance channel, again in more or less shallow water, by the Navy in 1960.
We're about 70 meters from the bottom. How much longer do we have in that move?
That sub was raised by the Navy.
Okay, good. Thanks.
And at the request of Japan, was returned to Japan after its bow with its torpedoes was removed because the Navy could not safely extract those still live torpedoes. That submarine today is on display at the former Japanese Naval Academy at Etajima outside Hiroshima.
Good.
What we do in the work that you're about to participate in is dive into the oceans, the Earth's last great frontier, to resolve questions like these wherever we possibly can, but also simply to explore and to learn. One of the great missions of NOAA, as America's Ocean Science Agency, is to go into the oceans, just as our colleagues work in the atmosphere, and in particular in the Weather Service, also help plot the movement of storms and give warning, and understand the dynamics of storms. As our satellites also do this up as our satellites do this out in space, and our aircraft do that in the skies, ships like Okeanos Explorer and partner vessels like Dr. Robert Ballard's Nautilus for the Ocean Exploration Trust, or the Schmidt
auto heading going in.
Institute's Falcor, and many others. We are
20 meters
tapping into
altitude,
this
just under
2/3 of the planet, which remains for the most part
Good. I'll watch for you in fisheye when I see
95%
you, I'll turn.
unexplored. Working with our
Backing up.
Office of Ocean Exploration and Research,
17 meters
NOAA
looks good.
scientists and colleagues from the academic world, from other agencies, and you, the public, also have an opportunity in live-streamed exploration, as was now about to happen, to go into this area and to boldly go where none have gone before. Sorry for the Star Trek analogy out there for some of you, but it truly is science just like that, and science that makes a difference. The oceans are key. They're the source of over half our food. They are the primary means by which our weather is controlled, and they are the source of much of the oxygen regeneration, of course, that which we breathe. And, as you will see, the oceans are a repository for much of our human history. We have been here before, thanks to the dives of the Pisces submersibles with the University of Hawaii. This submarine has been explored to some extent, but we're now dropping to the bottom, bringing a whole group of other scientists and you, the public, for the first live dives to see this submarine, just as some of you may have seen earlier the submarine sunk by USS Ward. In doing this, we hope to gather new high-definition imagery.
There we go.
And as well, obtain
I'll spin it.
observations, because ordinarily, and being one of those scientists who's been in the subs with the team from Hurl,
Down just a hair.
we can make observations back and forth from each other. We can write in our notebooks. We can bring back some photographs. But here, the opportunity is for scientists such as those joining us at the University of Hawaii's Exploration and Command Center, the opportunity to compare notes and in a very scientifically efficient and a cost-effective way be able to gather oceanographic data, to gather geological data, to gather archaeological and historical information, and to also learn more about the marine biology. On a number of our dives, we find new life that has not previously been known to exist, and the dives of Okeanos Explorer in particular throughout the Pacific over the last year have given us the opportunity to learn much, including some new species, as well as touch some amazing human history.
Pretty high still.
Stand by as we continue to drop to the bottom. We are getting closer, and as we do, prepare to encounter history. History that took place 75 years ago, and to this day remains powerful and pertinent.
Something else. Yeah, it's a reflection at D2 because it's spinning around with you.
Yeah. Pushing out.
All right. Looks pretty safe. I'm going to start closing the gap a little bit.
All right. I'll stay here for a bit longer. Continue to push out a bit.
And that's 45 degrees on the camera.
Perfect. I'll center it up.
And I'm just coming down at 15 right now.
All right, coming down nice and slow.
10. I'm actually coming down at 10, 12.
15 meters altitude. Turn my camera down.
So I'll just go down at 12 meters a minute till I hit between 15 and 20 altitude.
Okay, I've got bottom.
Sweet.
Sound check, Hawaii. Can you hear us? Honolulu ECC, University. Hans, can you guys hear us?
Sounds good, Jim.
10 meters altitude.
Copy that.
We're here, sounds good.
Pushing down. Everything looks good. I'm going to stay about 5 meters altitude here, 4 or 5, and see what we can find in sonar.
I'll hold at 20 then.
Okay, all right, so I'm going to push out a bit and maybe we, well, I guess we'll see if we can see anything first and then we'll get a ship move in.
Okay, you're going to push out?
Yep.
All right, let's looking at your sonar.
Something off to the port side, yeah.
What's that? Just a little noise? There's something there.
Something bright. 50 meters. Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna stay up a little higher. Can we push the range out? I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I think. Then we'll see what side we approach the. Nothing else.
All right.
I'm gonna come back starboard.
Looks pretty good.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of current pushing me back towards Seirios, and maybe slightly. It's coming. Seems like it's coming slightly from southwest.
All right. So it's about 30 meters away from you.
Just sweeping starboard to see if we have any other returns. Nope.
Yeah. Looks
All right,
like
let's check out the bright object.
Okay. Why don't you line up on that, and I'll line up on you, and I'll get 20 meters in your direction, I think.
Sounds great.
Won't put me really near anything, but it'll give you the tether to go investigate. All right.
Nope, this is the only bright return.
So you're heading off that direction towards
225.
225, okay. So I'll line up similarly. Something like that. 245, how's that sound?
Sounds good. Yep.
240 maybe? I don't
Split
have
the
anything on my
difference.
sonar.
So if you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, we are broadcasting
Alright,
live from
let's
the
do
NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer.
Let's get us 20 meters.
You are
bearing
approximately,
240.
if you're joining us, some
And
1,500
we'll
feet
speed
of
that's
water
comfortable
deep
for you.
off the coast of Pearl Harbor on the island of
D2's
Oahu
got a
in
good
Hawaii.
target for him
Yeah.
to reach. I'm going to give him a little bit of
We are
leash.
proceeding towards a sonar
good. We
target,
could do
which
0.2.
we believe to be one portion of a Japanese Kohaoteki
Yeah.
Type A Midget
240.
submarine, now known as mini submarine, that was lost during the Pearl Harbor attack
Yeah,
of
you're
December
definitely
7th,
towards me, huh?
1941. As you
Good
see
push
on the
out.
seabed here, we're going to be passing small pieces, artifacts, things of that sort, which do not relate to the Pearl Harbor attack. This area had been actively used as a disposal zone through the years that Pearl Harbor's been an active naval base. In these waters, the University of Hawaii's dedicated team has discovered not only things such as discarded, no longer used or damaged amphibious vehicles, even some of the cars and trucks that were used on the base, but abandoned aircraft, ships deliberately scuttled or sunk
Alright,
when no
reaching the
longer
end of your
needed,
leash.
and ordnance that was
Reach about
discarded.
25 meters away from here.
In the past, diving here with
Right,
University of
19 to 20,
Hawaii's
so
Terry
hopefully
Kirby,
you're within
Dr.
sight.
Hans van Tilburg and I, and Hans is
Hey,
joining us from
Roland,
the
you want to gain up
Honolulu
and
Center,
see if we can
have been privileged to
Take out
drift
anything.
over discarded battleship
stuff
shells,
in the water.
depth charges, all sorts of amazing things down there in
we're
this
all
undersea
stowed,
museum.
But we can deploy.
Enabling HPU.
And every once in a while, what then appears before you lit up for examination
you like one?
is some amazing
It's probably
historic craft.
Presets from
Thanks to the
earlier, it's no
research
good.
of the University of Hawaii's team at the Hawaii Undersea Research Lab, some
Would you like to do one?
historic vessels have been discovered. They include Japanese submarines brought here at war's end to be studied and then
Okay.
sent to the
Okay.
bottom.
Spin up a little
Most
more.
recently, the submarine discovered was
Times
I-400,
5.
a Japanese
Okay.
super submarine
Spin
capable
up
of transiting
around
the
here.
world
I'm standing
and with a
here
carrier
for a second.
compartment that could ship 3 aircraft, serving as an undersea aircraft carrier.
just drifting
That
back toward you
submarine
pretty
had been
quick here.
designed specifically for an assault on New York, but when that plan was abandoned at war's end, was then to go to the Panama Canal to try to blast its gates and drain it. Other discoveries include
feeling
former U.S.
comfortable,
warships.
If you set your
The other
camera
day,
to
we
5.5,
dived
I
the
know
former
exactly
U.S.
where
Navy
to go.
submarine S-19.
5.5.
Built in
I'll go close to the
1918
arm
and then
first,
after
but
a
go
long
set your
career,
rotator value to
scuttled here in
5.5,
1938
up on it
after having
nicely.
partially
Okay.
stripped
You got it.
to comply with the United
And you're
States
still rising.
agreement
Did you set your
with a
Z
naval
values?
arms limitation
Not yet.
treaty that had just been passed prior to the Second World War. And another vessel, the former USS Kailua, formerly the cable tending ship Dickinson, which had been built to service and repair the
5.5.
Trans-Pacific cable, which
Minus
carried the
5.5.
world's communications across the Pacific starting in the early 20th century, and a
No,
vessel
should be
which on
positive
its own
5.5.
Positive
was
5.5.
coming in
Okay.
with evacuated British personnel from another telegraph or wire station into Pearl Harbor on the morning of December 7th.
Positive 5.5.
After serving in the war, it was brought out and sunk, and it lies down here. So, in addition to those craft lost in battle, like the two Midget submarines, what we also see is a wide array of other wrecks that sit out here in the waters off Pearl Harbor in a vast, purposely assembled collection, if you will, not deliberately selected as a museum curator would do, and nonetheless not particularly maintained as a museum, but just the same a reminder that what sits down here at the bottom of the oceans oftentimes is, in its own way, perhaps the world's greatest museum.
Okay, come in partial video.
Joining us from
for me.
the University of Hawaii,
5.
we do have Dr.
Right.
Van Tilburg. I believe we also
Base
have Terry
12,
Kirby, Chris Kelly, and others
6.
from Hurl.
Oh, whoops,
Good,
I read the wrong thing in this book.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Jim. Hey, Jim. Morning, Jim.
Anything you'd
We're
care to
ready.
share? Perfect. While we're out here,
Board.
Terry, maybe you guys would like to talk a little bit about your dives and some of the discoveries you've made out here.
Well, the area we're going to now, where the three-piece midget is, was after 1991, when we decided to start dedicating some of our test dives to try and locate the Ward's midget. The very first year we did that was in 1992, and on that dive was when we came across the stern section of what is now known as the three-piece midget submarine. We recognized it right away as a stern section of a midget submarine. It had been disconnected at the flange joint. We could see that there was a cable that was rigged around the stern, so at that time, we just assumed that it was some war prize that was brought back and disassembled and then discarded. We didn't realize at the time on the first day that we spent dedicating
I've
test
come up-
dives to try
I've
and
come up
find
a
the
bit
Ward's
too,
midget,
because,
that we actually had
didn't know
located a
where it
piece
came
of the fifth and final midget from the Pearl Harbor attack.
Excellent.
Copy.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to come back down. Can I take my rotator and move it down?
Pilots, if you don't mind
Yeah.
jumping on OKX for a second and explaining to our audience what you're doing right now and some of the techs.
Hey, Roland, you can. They're talking about the white balance, so why don't you go ahead? I'm coming down, Jeff.
So what we've just done was
I
to
tilted you down.
do the white balance.
No, I'm moving.
We use a calibrated
Coming
chart
down to the seafloor.
in order to ensure the cameras are precisely calibrated to the lights that we bring down here. And this will give you an accurate representation should you see these objects from the surface. By doing this calibration, where we ensure that what you see down here is as accurate as we can possibly get on the surface.
That is an Amtrak. No, that's an Amtrak. That's a vehicle. So, Terry Kirby, we are at one of the Amtraks. We must be getting close.
Yeah, this is, there are several of these around,
Come down.
and as you see, it's in a crater.
Good.
And that's from the current continuing to scour away from these. There were some that were so deep that we couldn't pick them up as a sonar contact. We came to the edge of a crater, and there's a whole landing craft in the bottom
Well,
of
I
it.
think we need to.
So these don't get buried; they just get scoured with a current.
So from
And I believe that this might be one of the ones we found that had a hole in the bottom of it. But there are several of these around the bottom and in the general area of the midget sub.
Any guidance for the ROV pilots as we start to maneuver around this to head towards the pieces of the three-piece sub?
guess we'll pick back up and scan past it.
We should be close to the
It's up this way.
to the main hull section, the midsection of the three-piece mini sub.
Turn my head to follow you.
But we're going to see a lot of targets like this, so the the best thing is to remember where some of these targets are so we don't continue surveying the same target.
Roger that. Hans, do you mind telling everybody out there what we just looked at?
I'm going to keep turning
Sure. These were small amphibious assault vehicles that were critical to the campaign in the Pacific. Putting troops ashore in hostile territory is one of the most dangerous things that navies have had to do and continue to train for. And in this area, we suspect that small LVTs like this, probably an LVT-2, with that type of damage, likely came from Westlock in 1944.
Trail.
On May 21st, 1944, as we were preparing for the invasion of Saipan, Operation Forager,
that looks like
the LSTs that were nested near the naval magazine in Pearl Harbor were transshipping ammunition. Something went wrong. There was an explosion on the LST. Several other LSTs were damaged. These large amphibious ships had inside them these amphibious tracked vehicles that would deploy from the bow doors and then make the rush towards the shore. So there were numerous LVTs damaged, LCTs damaged, several of the LSTs lost in the Westlock explosions in 1944 are also out here in the depths of the ocean off of the harbor. Some of them have been discovered. Some remain to be found. And since it was wartime, the accident and the tragedy, there were many lives lost, particularly of the Army troops who were shipping that ammunition.
Yeah, let's go and do like
was hushed up. It was a secret at the time, and so it's sometimes not a story that's as well known, certainly, as the Pearl Harbor attack, but some have called it Pearl Harbor's second great tragedy, the Westlock explosion in 1944.
So I'm on 281, lined up with him.
Excellent. Thank you, Hans.
Yeah.
Terry, is this a shell? I seem to recall when we were diving with you with Hans that after we left that that vehicle, we passed right over or by a shell.
There are several of these, either coastal battery or battleship shells laying on the bottom out in this area.
Chris Kelly, are you there with us?
I'm right here.
Chris, maybe you might want to talk a little bit about what lives out here, and I think that for many of you watching, if you haven't been to the bottom of the deep ocean before, and most of us haven't, you might look at this as some form of a desert. But Chris, as I recall, there's a lot of life in here, isn't there?
Yeah, so we published a paper a number of years ago about the communities associated with disposed ordnance out in this area. And basically you have a group of animals that are adapted for living in the sediment. These are sea pens and certain types of fish and crabs. And then you have another whole group of animals that like hard substrate. So all of these munitions and all of this discarded
do you want to zoom in on this?
Pieces of equipment and the midgets of themselves are attractive to that group of animals, and these would include sponges and corals and certain types of sea stars and other types of crabs. So there's quite a lot of going on here, and the interesting thing is this area would not have hardly any hard substrate whatsoever if it wasn't for all of the material that has been dumped here. So there's been quite an interesting alteration in the community out south of Pearl Harbor.
Pulling out.
Thank you.
So that's a projectile of some kind, Hans. I don't know if you
Oh, hammerhead shark.
pretty good size.
Seirios.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Oh yeah. In the Seirios view, we've got a hammerhead shark.
Cool.
And back is like rifling.
Yeah.
I guess.
Oh yeah, there's a name for that. Yeah.
I thought I was scared for a second. I thought it was
Oh yeah. Serious.
I'm not even out there.
Hammerhead. Yeah.
Can we push past the skids?
Commenting, there's a hammerhead shark in the Seirios view that just passed by right now.
Close the drawer, that'll give you a little more room. Drawer retracting.
That's cool. Never seen one.
And we've got some more debris, artifact of some sort lying right here as well.
Our shark whisperer.
Again, just a reminder that the easiest way to get rid of material in the past was to deposit it in the oceans.
Okay, moving toward that target. You want to swing your head
How
back?
far are we in that ship move?
So we want to tack on.
So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we are on board the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, some 5 nautical miles off the entrance to Pearl Harbor, the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And what we are doing is diving on a target that is one of 2 Japanese Type A Kohaoteki Midget submarines, now known as mini submarines to some, associated with the attack 75 years ago today on Pearl Harbor. The way this system works and what you're seeing is 2 remotely operated vehicles which are deployed from our ship. These vehicles, one hovering above, the other maneuvering closer to the bottom in the different camera views, enable us to have a downward look as well as, there she is. Okay, just spotted her. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, get a little excited. Even we supposedly ice water in our veins, archaeologists, scientists get a little worked up when we see the target we're looking for. In that scour hole team, you're going to see the central portion of the sub. So the 2 systems,
I've eliminated
the 2 submersibles, these robots, if you will, operate together in tandem. One looks down, the other looks forward. They carry a variety of sensors. Streamed through their cable, back through a satellite, you're able to watch this live as it happens. So you get those moments of excitement when somebody like me blurts out, there it is. So in the gloom ahead, we are approaching the central section of the Midget submarine. And we'll talk more about it as we get there. But perhaps, Terry Kirby, again, you discovered this with the rest of the team in the year 2000, as I recall. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was 2000 when we came across this initially. When I came across, out of the dark came this hull of A-class Midget submarine. We recognized it with a conning tower and periscope. And at that time, it was obvious that the stern had been blown out by internal explosion. At that time, we thought that maybe we had discovered the Ward's Midget sub, and that was where the shell had detonated. But when I moved up along the starboard side, saw there wasn't a hole in the conning tower, and our silk cloud cleared away, we could see that it had been disconnected at the flange joint.
Right.
And that there was a cable that was rigged through the, there was a hole punched in the top just on the forward hinge at the flange joint. And that cable was sort of draped down along the bottom. So we realized at the time that this was a midsection that went to the stern section that we found in 1992, which was similarly rigged. So what we're looking at right now, we're coming across the after section. When we first found this, it was really obvious the metal head was torn and splayed out. That metal has since corroded away around one of the main frames, so it's much cleaner. It was very obvious when we first found it that. So this is where the scuttling charge that was just aft of the control room detonated and partially blew this sub apart. So the report that a submarine was discovered that was partially in 2 really fits this sub right here. When we first found it, the periscope and everything was intact. We went back to the sub a few years later, and it seemed like it was in the advanced stages of decomposition. But you can see some of the batteries and some of the lead leads from the batteries that are, that's what we're looking at right now in this aft section. So this is sitting just down inside of, there's a little berm here. But Jim, this is what we tried to set before to try and look into the control room. So we're approaching it from a good position. like our bucket dropped over.
Okay, your mic is not open, but I heard you want to put the photos up momentarily or right now?
Roger that. We're going to throw up some historic photos.
Okay, I'm going to do it on stream 3 full screen. Okay.
Hans, do you see the bucket?
Stream 3 is full screen.
Yeah, roger that. We're kind of scratching our heads on how it got tipped over with all that sand in there that we put in there.
Be aware you're in autoplay of your...
Roger that.
Well, I've actually watched one of those cook sharks come in and flip an experiment over once, so.
It could have been a big shark like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, what we're showing on the screen right now, for those of you who can watch on screen 3, this is a historic photograph taken by the United States Navy of the central portion of one of these subs. This is the submarine that washed ashore on December 8th and was captured, commanded by Kazuo Sakamaki. What you see in this photograph is labeled and indicated is that portion of the sub to which both the bow and stern would be bolted. The sailor standing on the top is facing forward, and so the area that we are looking at is aft, that is back part of it, and much of what you see in the historic photograph has been destroyed in an explosion which has opened up this hull and resulted in some of this damage. We're looking inside what was known as the after battery compartment, which is where a separate explosive charge would be placed and was in position for all of these submarines in the event that there was no other way to get out or to escape. What then would happen is that that charge would be set off. It was not necessarily designed as a toku or suicide weapon. What it was designed to be was a separate charge so that if you were in position where you could not get out, you could set this off underneath an enemy ship and try to sink it.
Gaining up.
The destructive damage we see here tells us that the crew in this submarine did, at the end of their mission, set that charge off. As to whether they were inside or not, we do not know. If they were, they would either have been in this place or farther aft where you see the sand piled up, which is the center command section of the sub. The bars that you see are from the batteries that were inside the submarine. This was the sole means of propulsion and power. And I'm also showing now another on screen 3 what those batteries look like, the batteries that were removed from Kazuo Sakamaki's submarine. You can see the bottom of the hull. You can see very clearly moving and looking back. You can see sand mounted up just past a bulkhead with a doorway or a hatch cut into it, which led into the central or command area of this sub.
Going to push into the sand on the top. A little tilt up.
You are now inside this submarine, which we believe to be the submarine associated with the larger sub I-16. The sand that you're looking at fills the area where the crew would have worked and been located. At this point, as that is very likely that what we are looking at, and actually we do consider this to be a war grave, I think it's entirely appropriate for a moment that we pause, and as we did previously with the other sub-dive, we note that this is most likely the resting place of Masaji Yokeyama and Sadamo Oyeda, the crew members who launched in I-16 To, or the boat that belonged to the larger submarine I-16. And with that, as well, with apologies for my bad Japanese, may we also say, Yasuraka ni onemuri kudasai. May they rest in peace. 75 years later, our former foes are now our friends, and they are our allies. And together, these young men, perhaps buried in that sand, sleep for eternity, just as the boys sleep inside the steel coffin that is the Arizona and in the Punch Bowl Cemetery and in other graveyards around America.
Full wide.
Down to the bottom left, what you see is one of those batteries which has been blasted open. You can see its lead plates in position and other batteries which have tumbled out. You also see some of the electric cable that tied all these batteries together.
Multi-view is back on stream 3.
Do you think those straps back inside are bus bars?
Yes, those are bus bars, I would say. So very good, exceptional imagery here. You can see the conning tower, and for those of you who joined us for the earlier dive on the USS Ward, you now get a closer view of what was sealed inside the USS Ward, Midget submarine.
If you look at your quad split, I've now put your photos in the bottom right corner of the quad split.
Roger that, thank you.
Yes, you're full wide.
So pilots, this is good. We're just going to continue around this side. We're going to want to look at the conning tower as well, but I think we can make a circuit of this first and go to the other end. And if you can, work up the other side, and then we'll look at the conning tower from there, please.
Quad split now includes the front camera.
Again, for those of you joining us, we are broadcasting live from the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, tied into our Exploration Command Center at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and to a variety of other scientists, friends, and all of you around the world, thanks to the magic of telepresence, which by means of these remotely operated vehicles streaming back to our ship and through satellite and then through the internet, you're able to participate in these dives. On your screen and screen 3, for those of you who can, there is a historic photograph of one of these submarines. And as you can see, that one intact gives you a good sense of the level of damage to this craft, which was scuttled by its crew in the aftermath of the attack using an explosive charge placed inside what was known as the after battery compartment. You can see the damage to the hull, which was far more pronounced when this sub was first discovered in 2000, and you also see the remains of some of its batteries having tumbled out onto the seabed. This was entirely a battery-operated craft with an electric motor. These craft were the epitome of high technology in the day, were capable of navigating more than 20 knots, and had an extended range if run at slower speeds. If this is indeed I-16's boat, this craft remained in action for close to 24 hours. The final signal received by the mother sub, ostensibly from this Midget sub, indicated that they were no longer able to navigate, and with that, most likely, the charge was set off, sending this sub to the bottom and most likely killing the 2 crew members. Masaji Yokoyama and Soemi Toyo.
Full wide. Push past skids. Copy.
Again, sorry. Killing the 2 crew members, Masaji Yokoyama and Sadamo Oyeda.
Now, is that the radio antenna?
The radio antenna, yeah, we'll see that there. Okay. So we are now moving it into an area that would be the forward battery compartment. Guys, I'd like to get closer to that hole and light it up. The hole that you see here is opened up in the side. Corrosion is ongoing, and it leads into the forward battery, which should still have its batteries inside. This compartment is more intact than the other, which of course had the scuttling charge go off in it. If you're looking at the historic photo, while it is reversed from the view we currently have, you can see the position of the conning tower and the placement of this compartment. There is an U.S. naval officer standing on top of it in the historic photograph, and that is one of these Midget submarines, which washed ashore on December 8th on the other side of the island, was captured, disassembled, documented, and then toward the country
If
selling
I
war
zoom
bonds
in,
to the end of the war.
Past the edge, you might see more.
Russ Matthews, are you with us?
It's on right now.
Just hit the. I'm here.
Saw the light swing away when you made that last swing arm move.
It's not demonstrating the light.
No, we're not.
Sorry. Honolulu, do you have Russ?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. So all of you out there, Russ Matthews is a colleague, participant in a number of these dives, and was here in 2014 with Terry Kirby and the team, making an amazing penetration with camera into this space and learning another secret of this sub and something that confirmed its identity. Russ, why don't you share that with everybody?
Sorry.
Oh, happy to. Yeah, we were able to insert a camera in actually that Colin Wallerman had engineered on the fly, to be able to get it inside this opening, and really, the first view initially we saw really just remains of batteries scattered throughout the compartment, and then tilted the camera up to try and look across the compartment and realized we weren't seeing the other side. We should have had a view of the internal structure of the rest of that hull, and realized there was something blocking our view, and then spotted just kind of the remains of a strap, and really what we've concluded is it was an extra air cylinder that had been inserted into the subs that were prepared specifically for the Pearl Harbor attack. So it was really more about what we couldn't see than what we could. But it was just one more piece of the puzzle, perhaps in revealing the ultimate identity of these subs.
Absolutely, and again, I think what that points to is how systematic returns to these subs, as we're seeing now with new camera systems with higher definition, we're able to learn so much more. Here we're getting a very good look at batteries inside. We can't tilt up as you were with a smaller camera to see that strap, but it all incrementally and sometimes dramatically adds to our understanding of what we're seeing, and in this case, further proof that this is the last of the 5 Midget subs involved in the Pearl Harbor attack. Its identity known to be a Pearl Harbor sub, likely, as we've heard from our colleagues in Japan, likely to be the boat launched by I-16, the first to be launched at 42 minutes past midnight on December 7th, and most likely waiting outside the entrance to Pearl Harbor, unable to get in, having been spotted by USS Condor and lying in wait until finally USS St. Louis came out, fired its torpedoes, and then after being shot at, submerged until close to the end of its battery power, its crew was able to send 2 signals, one suggesting that a successful attack had taken place, and the other then finally saying they were unable to navigate. And with that, then the charge, whose consequences we see on the other end of this sub, sent this vessel to the bottom, only to be rediscovered in 1951, quietly raised, cut into its other component part, and then dropped, only to be rediscovered in 1992, 2000, and 2001 by our colleagues with the University of Hawaii's Hawaii Undersea Research Lab.
One thing I might point out here, Jim, as long as you have your image up that shows the historic shot, there is about 10 feet of this section missing, where the stern section was disconnected and removed, and where the scuttling charge blew it off. So somewhere out there, there's another 10 feet of this that was part of the battery compartment.
Absolutely. And what I'm now putting up is Terry Kirby's illustration of that, showing how this submarine would have been configured and laid out, showing the stern section, showing the central section with the portion that is missing that Terry talked about. And you can see the battery compartments, and then the bow section. We are now on the top of the conning tower. The pulley and the apparatus here, the shears or the guards at the top of the conning tower from which the forward wire for net cutting would be deployed. Look at the condition of the shell plating on the sail there.
Yeah, this one was really in advanced stages of decomposition. Is when we first found it, the conning tower was intact and the whole periscope was there. This has a little more of a lift to port, so it's the weight of the conning tower has made a lot of it fall away.
Tony Tully with a question.
Yes, Tony.
Is the scuttling charge, were they able to set it off in a way where they could escape if they had the option?
Tony Tully just asked if the scuttling charges were set, would the crew be able to escape? It is theoretically possible. What is interesting is that the submarine found in Kehi Lagoon, apparently an attempt had been made to light the scuttling charge, but it had not happened. As to whether or not that happened as they abandoned the boat, hard to say. Or did they fail and then abandon the boat? What we don't know is whether or not this hatch, while closed, is locked. What Pinot's letter did suggest, actually said, is that the body of a dead Japanese military person, they weren't sure if he was naval or army or a pilot, they weren't sure if he was a pilot or not, I guess. There's the point. Had been found just inshore off a tripod reef, and strapped to his back was a sword. That is interesting in as much as we're not sure of how many pilots actually carried swords with them, but the Navy did recover Kazuo Sakamaki's family sword from his craft. The two Midget submarines sunk and entered by the Australians at Sydney. In both cases yielded the swords of the commanding officers. And so it is possible, if reading Pinot's letter, that the body that came ashore would be that of the commanding officer of I-16, Masaji Yokoyama, in which case, even after this charge was set, they potentially did get out. We just don't know. There's so many unsolvable, perhaps, mysteries associated with this. But what we can say for sure is, one, as we can see now as we're circling around it, that charge did go off, and it is a Pearl Harbor sub. And one of the ways we know that as well is that by now, just underneath the conning tower in that area, we would have seen the modifications that were added after Pearl Harbor for a trunk that connected these through the bottom to the mother sub. One of the things that happened on December 7th is that a couple of officers came along with their colleagues, making notes all the way on deficiencies and problems and things that needed to be corrected for the next missions. And one of those issues was having to climb out onto the mother sub on an open deck, climb up the side of the Kohai Oteki, go down into the hatch, down into the sub, and then deploy. So after that, all of the subs were modified, according to the Japanese, to have this trunk underneath, and the Sydney subs show that.
That is very interesting. I asked because just as I look at it, it's just a feeling, an intuition, nothing more positive than that. It just feels like a ship that was abandoned, that doesn't have bodies in it. It's just a feeling.
Yeah, I hear you. I do. It does have that sense of being something that was abandoned, and if that is the case, and that was Yokoyama who washed ashore, that body was recovered and buried, though we don't know what happened to that sword.
Mm-hmm. And so even the Sydney Midget had the modification.
Russ,
yes.
Honolulu, isn't it also true that the submarine crews, they wore the same flight suits that the pilots would have?
Yes.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it does have that.
So here you can see how badly deteriorated this submarine is as compared to the other. The sail here in and around the conning tower has fallen away. Terry, this is more than what we saw last time, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks like it's more open and more of that loose material has come off of the back part of the fairing on the sail.
The periscope is lying on the bottom just below. I can see it. I saw it when we came up.
Yeah, Jim, this is Hans. You may remember, but for those who wonder, that's the whole reason for that yellow bucket that's nearby the sub. In a past series of dives, when we were there with Terry, he indicated a light fixture, which was quite a diagnostic feature, that was lying underneath where this conning tower, this sail, will eventually collapse and cover. And so we made the call at the time to document that light feature in place on the seafloor next to the submarine, and then move it to a sand-filled bucket at a specific distance from the midsection. And that's the bucket that we see lying over on its side.
Hey guys, if you
Probably
can just
not
zoom in on the top
thereby.
and hold there, on the top of the conning tower. Thank you, Hans.
You can also see now the hole that was punched in the forward section that a cable was rigged in to rig this to dispose of it.
Right. So we'll talk about that really quickly. Before we do, for those of you watching the historical images, we've just put up the official naval portrait of the commanding officer of I-16 Toho, Masaji Yokoyama. There he is, and as well, his crew member, Sadamu Oyeda. We are at the top of the conning tower right now, and what you can see at the very top, just moving up a bit more, is where the periscope has broken off. The hatch is largely obscured in this area as well, just forward of it all the way over to the left side of the screen. Hold on just a second. Pilots, do you see the radio mast hole just over on the left edge of the conning tower on the top? See, zoom in on that, please. So we're now moving in on the radio mast. This is a rubber-coated, hand-cranked mast that would be raised to send a signal. Like that on the Ward Midget, it is down. So what Terry Kirby was just commenting on, and I know some of you have been asking with questions online, why is this submarine in pieces? Sometime after the attack on December 7th, the crew set off their scuttling charge of Shimose powder, which blew open that after battery and detached the stern from the rest of the sub. The Pinot letter of 1956 says that when found in 1951, the two pieces of the sub were a few feet apart. The Navy quietly went out and raised this sub, and they did so by attaching cable and pulling it up and then cutting it into its component third piece. The stern had already been blown off, but in this case the bow was then severed at the joint line or its flange with a cutting torch, and this was determined, and Terry Kirby can talk a bit about this in one of the earlier missions of the Pisces. Terry, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, initially there was some controversy as whether the Navy would have disassembled the sub. Some thought that they would have gone through and disassemble it like they did
we can back out.
Sakamakis, but as we know, by this time they knew as much as they wanted. So one of the things that we were able to do to determine exactly how it was disassembled was that we were able to scrape the flange joint on the forward end of this sub.
Move over towards the punched-in hole with the cable, please.
Bolt heads on that flange joint. And so each one of the sections, they actually cut the flange joint off and just sheared the bolt. So at that point, nobody climbed in the sub and disassembled it. It was cut off at the flange joints.
And there you really do see how clearly this was done. You can see how the hole was just simply punched in, and then this cable was threaded to lift this out of the water, and then loaded on a barge. Most likely these things were taken a few miles out to sea, rolled off and dumped to where we now find them. So in terms of archaeology, this isn't the initial place where this happened. This is what we call a secondary deposition, which is fancy talk for meaning they took it and threw it here, as opposed to this being where it originally sank. Terry, have you guys been able to look into this hole like this before?
Yeah, we were able to look in there. We actually got up and tried to get a light in there. But you can see most of those batteries that we found when we put the camera into the other access hole have come out of their racks and when this was deposited, and just have filled that compartment with loose batteries.
Right.
This hole is a little more opened up now than it used to be. It wasn't this large, but once again, this is really decomposing, and yeah, this hole is much more opened up than it was before.
So on the split screen historically, you can see these batteries as they looked historically. Pilots, if you can drop a target on this end of the sub as well. Roger.
Jim, that piece of metal or flashing with that color and that fastening pattern, it makes me think of a piece of aircraft that's blown onto the site, rolled in after the fact. What do you think?
Possibly so, yeah. As soon as if we could drift over there, that's when we can drop the target, guys. Let's do that before we proceed. We're going to head, we're fighting currents, as you can tell, ashore, but we're going to go to that end, and then hopefully we'll be able to look in at that end as well. See the thing that almost looks like rolled up carpet as well, Hans?
Yeah, that piece of rolled up carpet or rolled plastic has been there for some time. Once again, this is another little depression that was formed by current scouring where stuff collects.
So we're now at the forward end, and you can see the bulkhead that led into the forward battery compartment. Electrical cable coming out, as well as the larger cable looped by the Navy to lift this up.
That's the passageway there between compartments, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the that hatch led out of the forward
Jim,
battery
this is
into the bow.
Hans. We're looking at the rusticles that are coming down from the left side there on the flange, and Terry's remembering that's the area where they scraped in the flange to take the sediment sample, the corrosion samples, and so that increased slight impact right at that point is enough to create increased deterioration and corrosion and grow those rusticles.
Yeah, that's wild. I was looking at that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, that was the area that we cleaned down to bare metal where we could see the sheared off bolts.
Well, it gave the bacteria something fresh to eat, didn't it? That's wild. So, yeah, I'm going to want to zoom. I want to zoom. So, gentlemen, let's zoom in here and take a closer inspection of this end of the sub. Hans, do you guys see the same fitting that we saw? In a second, what you're going to see is something we caught a glimpse of, I think, inside the bow.
Yeah, so this, you can see the level, all these batteries that came out of the battery racks.
Perfect.
And filled that area up to the level, almost to the top of the door. So the hole in the side where we put the camera is just about right at that level.
Back out just a little, please. Perfect, thank you. zoom in on the circular thing on the bottom, please. Could be. Could be. Shoreside, anything further that you want to see here?
If you could, zoom into that dripping corrosion, possible rusticle right off the flange on the port side, left side there, halfway down. But just get a close look at those because that is the scraping area. We have an image of that from when it was scraped, and those aren't there.
Right. Guys, do you see that orangey area that's got some rust bleeding off of it? Can you, to the left, can you zoom over onto that, please? Roger that. Rusticles.
I always thought that the rusticles, the plastic rusticles, were much slower to form, but if that's just, a lot of corrosion in a very slight impact area, then it speaks to this midsection as a whole, as a feature, reaching a little bit more of a stable state of deterioration. And at any spot where that's weakened, then that opportunity for the corrosion focuses on, that one tiny breach area and forms something that looks like this. It's an interesting note for site formation processes. Plus, I just think it looks cool.
That wasn't that long ago.
Oh.
As we're looking at this, I think one thing that we should also point out is that one of our other partners is the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration, and the team that is working these robots, providing what you're seeing, in addition to the crew on board the Okeanos Explorer, help make this happen. It's important to note, particularly in as much as we've come out of a time in which scientific exploration and discoveries usually have a name attached to them. And that's never been the case. I've been fond of telling folks that Neil and Buzz didn't land on the moon alone, and they would be the first to tell you that. In every case, in every place we go, there's a team of folks who make these things happen. So we specifically want to call out and thank our friends at GFOE as well. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the crew of Okeanos Explorer. As the robots are driving, this ship with direct positioning is also maneuvering. Our skilled crew is working on that, and the crew concludes everybody from the engineers and the electricians who work to keep systems working and troubleshoot and repair them. It includes the stewards and the folks who have been making some incredible meals. It includes the deck crew. It includes everyone who has a role and plays a part in the ongoing saga of scientific exploration in the oceans. So thank you to all of them, as well as to all of those ashore. Just very quickly, guys, I would like to take a look just underneath the conning tower at two things, the fallen periscope and the yellow bucket. See the the linear feature, well, it's all rusty, that is likely the periscope. Want to zoom in on that? That's it.
It's been covered over.
In 2013, when we were here last, when I was here last with Hans, just before the mission in 2014, we noticed that the light fixture that is attached, the white light fixture that would be attached to this sub with a deterioration had fallen out and was being buried by debris. As well, at the time we hadn't noticed that this periscope part was lying there. What we ended up doing in an effort to protect it was to take that light fixture and put it into a yellow plastic bucket that we had, fill that with sand to isolate that artifact. The light fixture at some stage may very well have a serial number or something on it that would prove diagnostic and tell us more about whose sub it might be. That tub will be the next thing we take a look at, because we've noticed with some surprise as we came here that it is no longer where we left it and that it's been overturned. Though Terry Kirby had indicated you've seen fish do that thing, or sharks, I guess, right, Terry? Somebody's done it. Yes, please.
Yeah, I've
Roger,
seen,
into the bucket.
When we've had samplers set, I've actually seen a cook shark come in and take his nose and flip one of them over. They're very curious, so that may be what happened. But there are also some very strong currents out here, and we just set that bucket. The bucket is pretty much where we set it away from the wreck to keep it safe.
Yeah,
So it's possible the current could have blown that over as well.
Roger that. I want to see if that light fixture is still inside or if that's it lying just outside. It's roughly where we left it, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's where we left.
Yeah.
It's just tipped over.
Well, we didn't ask the shark before we left standing up in his house if it was okay.
Yeah. So I think the light fixture is still buried in the sand. It looks like that was the bottom. It's just spilled a little sand out.
That's good.
Got to be the tag, I guess. Yeah, you see that, Hans, it looks like the tag is still in there.
Yeah, I got that. Since it's in the same place, it just is a little more stable now. We'll just leave it tipped over.
Yeah, no need to set it up right. Yeah, there it is. Okay, we're good to go. Okay, guys, we're good. We can call this section and try to find the next two pieces. Roger. Yeah, copy that. Yeah, thank you, Nav. So for those of you ashore, the ROV pilots are doing a watch change right now, shifting out. It's complicated and sometimes nerve-wracking to drive these robots on the bottom of the ocean when you consider not only the size of the vehicle and the cost of the vehicle, the sensitivity of the vehicle and the instrumentation on it, but also trying to navigate something dangling on the end of a very long line with current, in the darkness, flying remotely, and also doing this in the dark with sonar only to guide you.
And sometimes nerve-wracking to ride these robots on the bottom of the ocean. Tully.
Yes.
I was wondering, they said they may have found it in 1951. Do they know what part of the year?
Roger that. We are good to go to proceed to the next section. Stand by for a second. Terry Kirby?
Yes, Jim.
I think we're done here if you guys agree on ashore, and we're ready to proceed to the next piece. Would you give us some guidance?
The next piece is to the southwest, and it is roughly about 90 meters to the southwest.
Roger that.
And that was an excellent survey of this piece. That was really well done. That was a really good survey.
Thank you. Pilots, we're going to go to the southeast, right, Terry? Terry, southeast, southwest?
Yeah, to the southwest.
Pilots, we're going to go to the southwest. Southwest 90 meters to the next section.
And it'll be the stern section will be the next one we'll come to.
Roger that. Thank you, Terry.
Tony Tully with a question.
Go ahead, Tony.
It was found in 1951. Do they know what year it may have been? I mean, it was deposited in 1951. Do they know what month or what time of year it was?
Hold on, Tony. I'm sorry. I had other voices in my ear. I've turned them off so I can hear your question. Could you repeat?
Yes. It was deposited in 1951. Do they know what month or part of the year?
At this stage, we do not know what time that happened. All we know actually would have been the Vanderbilt expedition. I'm trying to remember. I believe was in the early summer. So it would have happened not too long after that. So I guess one of the next things we need to do is to figure out from logs who was out doing what with harbor maintenance. But it may have just been, this is pretty shallow water there by the hand buoy. They could have had whoever was doing buoy maintenance or work there just pick it up because it wouldn't have been that deep. But I'm trying to remember who was it that picked it up and
considering
go ahead.
I was trying to consider in terms of the post-war. That's just about 5 years after the end of the war, just a little over. Why there seemed so little interest in it, or was that back when they thought there were still multiple ones?
A good question as to why they would have just taken it out and dumped it 6 years after the war. One of the points we make in the book is that having gone through the intelligence records, by 43 had pretty much decided there was nothing to be gained by examining these other than going into subs to specifically get intelligence data, which would be chart cases, operational orders, things of that sort. So when, as well, there was also a memo stating that any operations whatsoever were not to be broadcast, and if anything was to be shared, it was that they were just simply messing around, which is certainly the case with some wartime released pictures of the U.S. CGC Ironwood working to raise one of these at Guadalcanal. And then it just said they were just messing around, and yet we do know from the records it was an intelligence operation, and what it ended up yielding was the operational orders for the Ko-Hayoteki Corps at Guadalcanal, as well as the operator's manual for how to drive the thing. And that sub ended up being the one that was taken back to the States and is on display at Groton, and that's Ha-8, or boat number 8 as they called it at the time. When they raised other subs later, we have the intelligence reports from raising them at Okinawa. They just simply picked up a more intact one and took a couple photos, and it's a very famous group of photos of that, and then they took it into deeper water and dumped it. So they really just didn't have much of an interest after 43. And so by 51, just yet another one, no big deal. But by 1960, it had already begun to pass into the realm of history, which is why we think the one found at Kehi Lagoon didn't just get taken out and sunk deeper.
That was interesting because I noticed in 1951 is also when they put a plaque on the Utah. I just didn't know if it meant there was more activity in that year or not.
Yeah, hard to say. I just think from what we saw from the Pinot letter, as it was read to us, was just basically Vanderbilt was out there and doing some dive ops, and they came across the submarine and reported it quietly, and SINCPAC said, destroy it.
Oh, okay. That explains it. Thank you.
So this is Bruce Mundy with the NOAA Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center. Early on, there was a question of what sort of life is in this area.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing a lot of pale eels swimming around as we cruise. These are snake eels. There are 2 species that occur at these depths, and they're a really good example of the type of fish that you see. There could also be some deep water flounders in this area, but these snake eels are cruising around just over the sediment, looking for small animals, little amphipods or other crustaceans for food. They can also bury in the sediment. So the pale eels that we're seeing are snake eels.
Thank you. For those of you just joining us, we are broadcasting live from the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, 5 nautical miles off the entrance to Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. On this occasion of the 75th anniversary of the attack of Pearl Harbor, we are diving on 2 targets, Midget submarines, now known as mini submarines, known originally as Kohayoteki in Japan. These craft were used in the attack. 5 were launched. 1 made it inside, and after launching its torpedoes was then sunk by ships inside Pearl Harbor. The others did not make it in. 1 was washed ashore and captured the following morning. 1 was sunk by the duty destroyer USS Ward just before the attack, and that was the target we dived this morning. 2 others were subsequently found after the war on both sides of the entrance to Pearl Harbor's entrance channel. One of those is this submarine, which was found in 1951, and then after being cut into its component pieces, was taken out and dropped in deeper water. The fifth and final was found in 1960 by U.S. Navy divers, raised, and after its bow was removed because the torpedoes could not be safely extracted, the remainder of that sub was returned to Japan. We should be heading towards the tail. Pilots, we should be heading towards the tail.
We do have a sonar target coming up.
You're hearing the voice of Frank Cantellis, archaeologist with NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, who joins us here on Okeanos Explorer as one of the co-leads of the dive on board the ship. Frank, Okeanos Explorer and the Office of Ocean Exploration and Research have seen some interesting things on the bottom, both biologically and geologically, but also archaeologically. This year in particular was a pretty interesting one.
Yes, it was a very interesting year this year on the Okeanos Explorer. And thanks to telepresence, all of us in Silver Spring were able to join in on some of these dives, just like the folks online are now. But earlier this year, the ship was off Tinian Island near Saipan. Tinian Island was an air base in World War II, and we were very interested in looking for lost aircraft off the island. B-29 bombers flew missions to Japan from Tinian, and we did a lot of mapping in that area, located a target, which we weren't really sure was an aircraft or not based on our sonar information, but we took a chance and made a dive on it, and we found a B-29 bomber lost in World War II there. Very significant find. Not many, actually I don't think